Hey, how's it going? This is Josh from Tech with Josh, and this is episode 33 of Tech with Josh. So, for this episode, I wanted to talk about something that honestly has been sitting in my head ever since Apple made it official, and that is the Mac Pro, or I should say, the end of the Mac Pro. Now, the title of this episode is The Mac Pro Didn't Die, it just stopped making sense, and that's really how I look at it because, yes, Apple officially discontinued the Mac Pro. That part is done. That part is real. But to me, the bigger story is not that Apple killed it now. The bigger story is that the Mac Pro had already been losing its reason to exist for years. And what makes this interesting to me is I was actually wrong about where Apple was going with this. When Apple announced the new M5 processors and started talking about the architecture behind them, I got excited. I really thought maybe this was finally the moment where we would see Apple do something wild again at the high end. Maybe not call it extreme, maybe not use that exact branding, but something in that lane. Something above Ultra. Something that would justify a Mac Pro again. And in my head, the Mac Pro felt like the perfect machine for that. I mean, think about it. Massive chassis, tons of airflow, big internal space, and Apple literally sold it in a server rack version. So if there was ever a machine in their lineup that could house some monster Apple Silicon chip, I thought it would be that. I thought, okay, maybe Apple's been quiet because they're building towards something bigger. But nope, I was wrong. And I'm fine admitting that because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't wrong about the Mac Pro being capable of that kind of future. I was wrong about Apple even wanting that future in the first place. Because Apple wasn't building toward a bigger Mac Pro. Apple was moving away from the entire idea of what the Mac Pro used to be. And that's what makes this whole thing kind of weird to think about. Because the Mac Pro used to mean something. It wasn't just another desktop in the lineup. It was the desktop. It was the machine. The machine you looked at if you wanted the best Apple had. Even if you couldn't afford it, even if you had no real reason to buy one, it was still the dream machine. For me, that goes all the way back to the Power Mac days. I remember those old Power Macs, especially the G5 era, and those things just looked serious. They looked like workstations. They looked like something that was overbuilt on purpose. And that was part of the appeal. Some of those systems had dual processors. Some of them had liquid cooling. Apple, for a brief period, really leaned into raw desktop power in a way that feels strange to think about now. And then when Apple moved to Intel, the Mac Pro became even more important because now it wasn't just powerful, it was expandable in the way pro users actually cared about. You had multiple drive bays, PCIe slots, GPU upgrades, more RAM, more storage. It was the kind of machine you could keep alive for years because the machine wasn't locked to one exact moment in time. You could change it, you could evolve it, and that mattered. That's one of the reasons older Mac Pros had such long lives. The community kept them going, people modded them, patched them, put in newer GPUs, forced newer software onto them. These machines outlasted what Apple probably expected because they were built in a way that let people keep pushing them. That was the identity of the Mac Pro. And then 2013 happened. Now, I know some people loved the 2013 Mac Pro because it looked cool, and honestly, it did. That trash can design was one of those Apple moves where you looked at it and thought, okay, this is either genius or this is going to age terribly. And the problem was it aged terribly because Apple took the Mac Pro and kind of removed the thing that made it a Mac Pro. Instead of leaning into internal expansion, they decided pro users should just expand outward through Thunderbolt 2. The machine had that thermal core design, which was interesting from an engineering point of view, but it created limits. You were locked into the GPU configurations it launched with. The internal flexibility was basically gone compared to the towers that came before it. And over time, it became this weird thing where the older Mac Pro, the big cheese grater Intel tower, was still useful because you could actually do something with it. The 2013 Mac Pro felt like Apple trying to redefine the pro desktop around minimalism, And the people who actually needed a pro desktop were like, no, that is not what we meant. And what made it worse is Apple just left it there for years, still selling it, still asking premium money for it, still acting like it was the answer while the rest of the world had kind of moved on. That was the part that made it feel like a joke. Not even because the machine was bad when it launched, but because Apple let it sit for so long that it became impossible to take seriously. Then in 2019, Apple finally corrected course. And honestly, when that Mac Pro came out, it felt like Apple was finally listening again. The cheese grater look came back. Expansion came back. PCIe came back. It was expensive, yes, very expensive. If you maxed it out, you were looking at ridiculous money. But that wasn't really the point. The point was, it made sense again. It knew what it was. It was for people who needed internal expansion. It was for people doing heavy video work, audio work, high-end production, all of that. Apple even made the Afterburner card for video workflows. The message was clear. This was the Mac Pro again. And for a minute, it really felt like it was back. But the timing could not have been worse. Because right after that, Apple made the biggest move, the move that changed everything. Apple Silicon. Now, when Apple introduced the M1, I don't think everybody immediately understood where this was heading. People knew it was impressive. People knew performance per watt was nuts. But I don't think most of us were thinking in terms of what it would do to the rest of Apple's lineup long term, because Apple Silicon didn't just make the MacBook Air better. It didn't just make the Mac Mini more interesting. It changed the logic of the whole Mac line. All of a sudden, power wasn't about having the biggest box anymore. Power wasn't about how many bays you had or how many GPUs you could swap in. Power was becoming about integration, unified memory, efficiency, performance in a smaller form factor, more done with less. And once Apple started going in that direction, the Mac Pro was in trouble whether Apple admitted it or not. Because what is the Mac Pro supposed to be in a world where a much smaller machine can get you close enough for way less money? That's where the Mac Studio comes in. The Mac Studio, to me, was the moment the writing was really on the wall. Because once that machine showed up, it became pretty obvious what Apple thought the Pro desktop was supposed to look like now. Smaller, cleaner, more efficient, more appliance-like in a weird way. Not modular, not meant to be opened and changed over time. Just buy the configuration you need and go. And look, the Mac Studio is a nice machine. I've said that before. I've even looked at it and thought, yeah, when the M5 Studio comes out, that's probably the machine I'd be looking at. So this isn't me saying the Studio is bad. It's not. It's actually a really impressive machine. But that's also the problem for the Mac Pro. Because the Studio got close enough in performance for a lot less money in a much smaller body. And once that happened, the Mac Pro started looking less like the king of the lineup and more like this expensive leftover from a different design philosophy. Then Apple did bring Apple Silicon to the Mac Pro, and that should have been the moment, right? That should have been the moment where the Mac Pro justified itself all over again. But it didn't, because once it arrived, what were you really getting? Similar performance to the Studio, but for a lot more money. The chassis was bigger, the expansion was technically there, the PCIe lanes were there, but the old logic of Mac Pro expansion didn't really apply anymore. You couldn't just throw in a new GPU like before. You couldn't turn it into some open-ended monster over time the way the old Intel towers let you. So you were paying for the body, the slots, and the idea of a Mac Pro more than the actual practical difference for most people. And that's why I keep coming back to this line. The Mac Pro didn't die. It just stopped making sense. Because once the Studio existed, the Mac Pro needed a reason to exist above it. A real reason. Not nostalgia. Not, well, it has slots. Not, well, it's bigger. It needed something undeniable. Some chip, some capability, some workflow, something that would make you go, okay, yeah, that's why this machine is still here. And Apple never gave it that. That's what I was hoping for with the M5 direction. I thought maybe now, maybe this is where Apple finally pulls the trigger on something bigger than Ultra. Something that only the Mac Pro could really take advantage of. More thermal headroom, more memory, a larger board, some truly insane desktop class Apple Silicon part. But that was me still thinking like the Mac Pro mattered to Apple strategically. And it really didn't. By the time newer Apple Silicon generations started rolling out and the Mac Pro wasn't getting touched, that was already the answer. Apple didn't see a future there worth investing in. And if we're being honest, modern workflows were kind of moving away from it too. Even with the rise of local AI and LLM workloads, what are people doing? A lot of them are clustering smaller systems, multiple Mac studios, separate nodes, different boxes doing different jobs. They are not all sitting there waiting for one giant Mac Pro to save the day. That's what makes this such a weird ending, because from a physical design point of view, the Mac Pro still feels like the machine that should be able to adapt. Big chassis, big cooling potential, big internal space. It feels like the machine that should have survived this transition. But Apple's idea of computing changed more than the machine did. And once that happened, the Mac Pro basically became a product from a previous Apple philosophy trying to survive in a new one. It couldn't, so now it's gone. Officially, quietly, no dramatic funeral, no huge keynote moment, just discontinued. And honestly, that feels fitting in a sad way, because the Mac Pro didn't end with some catastrophic failure. It ended with irrelevance. It ended with Apple kind of admitting what had already been true for a while. This machine no longer had a clear place. And that's what makes it more than just another discontinued product to me. It's the end of a very specific idea of what professional computing used to mean. Bigger machine, more internal room, more upgrades, more expansion, more years of keeping a system alive through changes and add-ons and community work. That whole mindset has been fading for a while. And the Mac Pro going away makes that official. There was a time when the dream was a tower under your desk that you could keep building on for years. Now, the dream apparently is a smaller box that does almost everything you need right now. And when it stops being enough, you replace it. That's a different relationship with computers. And maybe that's just where we are now. Maybe that's just modern computing. Maybe efficiency won, maybe integration won. Maybe for most people, that really is better. But I do think something got lost there, because the Mac Pro was never just about specs. It was about possibility. It was about headroom. It was about the idea that this machine could grow with you, and that mattered. Even if most people didn't buy one, it mattered that it existed, and now it doesn't. And that's why this one stood out to me more than I expected. Because it's not just Apple cleaning up a product line, it's a signal that a certain kind of pro machine and a certain kind of pro user mindset is not where Apple wants to go anymore. And maybe that makes sense. But still, it's the end of something. So yeah, the Mac Pro didn't die overnight. It just slowly became harder and harder to justify until one day, Apple finally made it official. And that, to me, is the real story. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow and subscribe to Tech with Josh on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss the next one. And if you want more from me outside the podcast, you can check out the Books by Josh audio immersion or head over to booksbyjosh.com for more writing and posts like this. But that's it for this episode of Tech with Josh, and I'll catch you in the next one.